starting the podcast! Shut up!
Good morning to you, wherever you are, because it is Morning Somewhere! For October something, 2024. We don't know when this is coming out. My name is Burnie Burns, sitting right over there. First-time guest on the podcast, Mr. Trevor Collins. Say hi to Trevor, everybody.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Burnie.
Hey, Trev, how you doing, man?
I'm doing all right. That was my UFC Bruce Buffer impression. I've been watching some UFC lately, and I feel like I want to do that.
Let's get ready to morning. Yeah. Do you know he trademarked that, right?
Did he really?
Yeah, that was like one of the first sports things, because he used to do boxing back when like the heyday of like HBO boxing and stuff. My voice is a little froggy. I'll explain that in a second. He used to do that, and then he trademarked it, and it wasn't really all that controversial, I don't think, when he did it. But since then, it's become more controversial as people trademark what they used to call catchphrases. But
that's hot.
Right, didn't Paris Hilton try that?
Tried, yeah.
Trump tried you're fired.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. We were talking about that. We talked about the epic teardown of the React channel. We were talking about it and going over some of that stuff. Yeah.
Somebody tried to recently trademark out from under this TikTok creator the very demure, very mindful.
Right.
That was a more recent one. Yeah.
And what happened? Do you know what happened with that?
I think they trademarked it so they could merchandise it. And I saw the drama, and that's the last I heard. I don't know.
Yeah. It's kind of unfortunate because there's people who are, there's people who are more savvy about that than other people. You know what I mean? Like the Hawk Tua girl seems to have done pretty well.
It's amazing what you can grow off of these days. Just explode off of like a moment. And if you're ready to capture it, you can manifest your dreams.
She did an interesting thing too, where how crazy is it? You're just out at a club one night, you're walking down the street, somebody puts a microphone in your face, you basically do a yes and, right? And she was funny and endearing, and in that one moment went viral, and now she's got a whole career based on it. She's got a whole podcast.
I feel like most people would ruin their careers in that kind of environment. Say something regrettable, and it sticks to them forever.
It's a little bit lost of time, too, because it was such a big meme. No one could find her for like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Like she was smart and kind of stayed away and seemed to maybe be building a strategy at that point in time.
Maybe somebody found her and said, hey, let's like build this thing and launch it. I don't know, like a talent manager or something.
Pretty, one of my kids will go to college 20 years from now. It's like, I'm taking Hawk Tua theory.
Oh, God.
How to build an online brand, the Hawk Tua theory. And have you heard her podcast, that she has a podcast now?
I did hear about it. I've seen peripheral. And speaking of UFC, I've seen that she's been at fights, but that's as deep as I go in the well.
Yeah, I think she's in Jake Paul's company. So it's like a whole machine now, part of it. But it's got a great name, the podcast.
What is it? Hawk Talk?
Talk Tua.
No, Talk Tua.
I love it. But we were talking about, you and I, we were just talking about like taking classes at some point in the future. You're the person that I often bounce like high level sci-fi ideas. Like I've done some things with you where I've like bounced some ideas off of you and things like that. We talk through that because I think it's pretty well known. You're the host of the Red Web podcast. A lot of people in the audience would know you as being the boss of Achievement Hunter. Is that the term?
I suppose so, yeah. As much as one can be of that chaotic, self-running entity. Yeah.
Cat herder.
Yeah.
And I think it's pretty well known, I think at least, for people who know you, that your degree is not in communications or film or television or entertainment at all.
No, it's aerospace engineering specifically. Right. My major was aerodynamics, and my minor was dynamics and controls, like how a satellite moves through space.
Aerodynamics. So that's the full major, and then you had a minor. So it's not just like, I think at UT, all we had was aeronautical engineering, if that. But it's not a big thing at UT, I don't think.
It's such a big thing at Purdue. Like Purdue's one of those just well-known engineering schools. Yeah. And so I'm sure, Georgia Tech and all the Virginia Tech, all these other amazing schools also have these deep breakdowns, but you basically pick your major and within that there's a focus.
Okay.
So,
yeah. Well, like you see, like for instance, UT, I went in, I started off as pre-med, but pre-med is not a major. It's just a grouping of classes that you take along with typically a science major that qualifies you for med school because they want to see certain things. But theoretically, you could be an English pre-med major. I was biology pre-med. That's just the most amount of overlap in the Venn diagram.
Does that just set you up for better connective tissue of the subjects later on? Like,
And just you're not taking a bunch of extra classes. You have to take
so.
this stuff for pre-med. It turns out 90% of that applies to a biology major. And so you do it, you know?
Yeah.
And so and then I ended up switching to computer science, which is, it's weird. It's in the College of Natural Sciences.
It's just silicon biology.
Well,
you know?
I think it's because it was an offshoot of the math department.
Okay.
Like so it's not in engineering at UT. And, it's always funny because you and I were like, we would always talk because we both had science education backgrounds, and here we were working at this entertainment company together, you know? So we would always have fun discussions about that.
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting, and one thing that stood very loud and clear to me as I was going through Purdue is almost a majority of the engineers that I had heard from that either went to Purdue or somewhere else weren't working in engineering. There were so many people that were working in business or law or finance, whatever. And it just kind of showed me that, okay, cool, this is a strong foundation. There's so much cool stuff going on in engineering, but it also sets you up for a lot of different career styles wherever you want to go. And I think, honestly, a lot of degrees just do that. They set you up for learning and acquiring new skills. And I just think, I'm biased, but I think engineering it teaches you how to pull things apart to understand it.
And I think, also when you go through an undergrad educational system, that's really part of it as well. I think a lot of employers then when you go out, they like to see you've completed a degree because you can take a set of requirements and show that you know how to fulfill that.
Yeah.
That's why undergrad degrees are so attractive or kind of like a baseline for, first level employment for a lot of like career level jobs.
Right.
But I sent you this article where, and I thought it pertained to us too. This is actually an old study, but they said that, 28% of people in American workforce use their major in their career. Like basically they chose a major, they completed a degree, and then they went into a field for that. Only 28% of graduates do that.
That's pretty nutty. That's a pretty small percentage based on what I would have gathered, what I would expect.
But like how many people, like, do you remember at Rooster Teeth, A, that even had degrees, but B, the ones that did, were they working, did they have communications? Like Matt Hullum had a degree in film, essentially. Gus was studying, he never finished. He was studying, what was Gus? I guess he was math or engineering of some kind, but I didn't know a lot of people who had like communications degrees that were there.
A lot of RTF, Barbara, my fiance, marketing, there's a big overlap there, but
yeah.
I wonder if it's almost the tradition is just kind of being broken a little bit more as this world is more connected online. We can realize, you don't have to take the traditional path. Not that I'm preaching or anything. To get a degree to do X, Y, and Z, I think it's just, if you want to go do something, you kind of do it. And the degree is a symbol of your ability to learn. I mean, like you said, when you get hired at any job, they're not going to trust what you've been taught. They're going to reteach you those things anyway.
100%. Yes. Yeah. In fact, they'll try to make you forget most of that stuff.
Yeah.
And also, it's kind of the, I guess we all realize it. Anybody who has any level of education, you don't end up using a lot of it on a day-to-day basis. When I was in high school, a lot of my math was basically like farmer math.
You used an abacus with the beads on it, right? And,
They had just invented division. But it was like, we would do shit like calculate the volume of a cylinder, or like...
You don't look at a can and just do that every morning?
Don't ever do it. Or like, you take there's a word problem, like you're filling a pool with a hose that puts out 10 gallons a minute, and you have a hose draining the same pool at 7 gallons a minute. Here's the volume, or here's the, the measurements of the pool, calculate the volume, and then how long is it going to take to fill it? My answer was always, well, first of all, I take out the second hose. It's like, not all of this stuff is applicable.
You scratch it out and say 0.
Yeah. And then it just fills at the level of the first hose.
I get very cynical about education because I've always been guided personally by passion and interest, because that's when I learn really fast. And I hate being taught for tests. I want to be taught for just chasing the horizon really fast.
Yeah, yeah. But it's like, those, and anything that you learn, anything you do in education, it teaches you how to teach yourself.
Yeah.
And that's always a valuable thing. You'll use that every second of the day for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
The one exception is, and I know for younger people especially, you got to know how to do math in your head. You got to have your 12 by 12 multiplication table in your head on call all the time. And you got to know how to calculate percentages. I just feel like you got to be able to do that.
When I was a kid, I had a morbid fascination with how math was just kind of patterns. And so I remember being in the shower. This is so nerdy. I'd be in the shower just doing whatever. And I would like give myself a random math thing based on just what I'm looking at. Like, okay, well, if I've used this shampoo for like 3 weeks and it has this much, and I think I used it, how long will it last me? Why am I doing that to myself? I don't know. But it taught me to kind of see math as a pattern so I can move numbers around and do mental math quickly.
Yeah. Did you ever learn something late in life too, and you're like, that can't possibly be true, and then you do it and you realize that it's true? I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
I learned too late in life that you can flip percentages. Like if you want to calculate 80% of 50, you can just calculate 50% of 80, and it's the same number. It's 40.
Yeah.
You know? And that's I didn't believe it. I was testing something. I was like, what did I learn this from Instagram or whatever? You know?
Well, there's so many different new techniques, like long division. The way we did it is totally and differently taught, and multiplication to kids now than it was when I was a kid.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. I guess I was involved with what they called number sense at the time, and I still feel like I use that. It's always fun for me to talk to people and say, like, you know, if you do like a multiplication thing, how did you get there in your head? And everybody does different things. Like some people will like knock it up to the next 10 and then subtract, and it sounds like it's so much harder to get to the result, you know, or longer, but you can just do it so quickly, you know?
Yeah.
Because the individual calculations are so much easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, coming back to engineering, I remember, and kind of its connection to the job market and how people work in totally different fields. I remember vividly my first year engineering course that every engineer had to take. So it was buck wild, which is just heads in there. 2009, and the professor says, look left, look right. You know, one of these people isn't going to make it. But then in addition to that, he's saying, and half of you, I think it was about half, I don't know the percentage, won't be working in an industry or a job that exists yet.
Right. That's crazy.
And that was 15 years ago.
Yeah.
With how fast exponentially like tech grows, I can only imagine, especially in engineering, what that means today. Jobs are arising within years, let alone a decade.
Do you feel like, because what year were you born, if I may ask, sir?
90.
You were
1990.
So the internet's been around pretty much as long as you can remember.
I'm one of those cuspers where I can walk both worlds. You know what I mean?
You're a daywalker.
Yeah. I can live without, but I kind of crave the sweet, sweet sound of AOL dial-up.
But do you think AI is the biggest thing so far? What's going on right now, or what's on the cusp of all the changes? Do you think that's one of the biggest changes you'll have seen in your lifetime, or, you know, around your lifetime?
It's so hard to say, because I'm not very good at extrapolating out a possible future and being accurate. I can see all the paths and how they make sense. I think the internet and connectivity, which then drove social media, but then drove a lot of other world change, is still fundamentally a disruptor to society. Not necessarily in a bad way, but definitely a changer. As far as AI, one thing I've been thinking about lately is how AI is becoming a label that's attached to many, many things. When I was growing up, AI was the idea that there is a robot that is sentient, that is self-aware.
Yeah.
That has now been reclassified as general AI. And AI itself has now been a label of anything that's algorithmic, anything that's automatic, anything that is predictive, or anything that is quintessential, air quotes, AI, like large language models. So it's hard to say. And it's also hard to say because they all hit, I don't know the name of this, where they all grow rapidly until they hit this like line where they can't pass it. If you know what I'm talking about.
Like Moore's Law?
I think so.
Yeah.
Where eventually they kind of hit their own limits. And so right now we're in this rapid growth phase, but a lot of people are already predicting an end of that growth and a plateauing. And the next step, that general AI, is still very far away. So all it is to say is, yes, it is a wild new set of tools, and it is changing a lot of things. You know, people are talking about music and art and the disruption to that. But the entertainment industry already has a lot of disruption without that. And so it's hard to say, but I think it is a big puzzle piece. So if it's not the biggest changer, it is definitely the second, I would say. Yeah,
and I'm with you because I do think that the LLMs have a weird classification as AI. I think we just need something different, like hyper automation or something like that. Like some level of automation that was completely different than anything else we've experienced, but it's not quite artificial intelligence to me. You know, it's like some of the tasks that I give the AI to do, I don't consider them to be intelligent tasks for me.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's more like it's more like just rote kind of stuff. But I want to talk about this because this leads well into what you do for a living, which is the Red Web podcast, which you explore the fringes of society.
Sure.
Essentially. But before we get away from the college thing, I'm going to explain my froggy voice. So we're recording this a little bit early. This is, I just last night was at the UT versus Georgia football game. Number 1 versus at the time, number 5. I'm sure they've swapped places now, and UT is probably even lower. But UT lost the game. But it's relevant because now this has become a national story, this UT game, because first of all, Georgia played a fantastic game. It's like UT did not even have an offensive line. It was just so frustrating to watch at home and everything. And that frustrating experience of watching the team just get shellacked, especially in like the first half. There was a call that was made by the refs where it was Georgia had the ball. They passed towards the sideline. I couldn't see the actual play from where I was sitting because it was like just below the sideline. We're pretty low and on that side of the field. But UT intercepted. The guy ran all the way back to like the 10-yard line. It was an amazing play. And UT did not have any good plays in this thing. Then they called pass interference. So they took away the interception, took away the run back, everything. And it was like this huge bummer. Then they showed it on the Jumbotron. And it was objectively a garbage call, like terrible call. Stadium. Huge stadium, 7,000 people there. It was packed. Everyone just starts like booing. Like I've never heard that much animosity from that crowd before. And then the student section, and I want to be clear about this, it was specifically the student section, they started throwing shit on the field, which I had never seen before from Texas either. And it was weirdly like very consistent. It was all water bottles. Like, I don't know if they handed out water bottles to all the student section, but it was like hundreds of water bottles, if not thousands. Like covered like one half the end zone down there. The coach had to walk across the field and like calm the student section down and everything. Here's the weird part. First of all, I got to say about that, I'd like to try to defend it as a Texas fan. I can't really defend that kind of behavior.
No.
You know, it was the student section. I was there. No one in any other section was throwing anything. I mean, I think maybe one can of beer got thrown at the beginning from like midfield. But it was almost exclusively, like 99% was stuff coming out of the student section. They're students. It's an NCAA game, heightened stakes. They're going to do dumb stuff sometimes. It's still a trashy move, no pun intended. The weird thing was the refs then get together and they said, after further discussion, there was no pass interference, which there's no mechanism in the rules for what the refs did. They just took away the penalty. It wasn't an overturned penalty. It wasn't a reviewed penalty. From what I understand, because the rules change all the time, it's still not a reviewable penalty, a pass interference. And they just said, you know what, never mind. And now it's like this huge deal. Why did the refs make this decision to overturn the call? It was to Texas's benefit, so I'd like to say I like it. But it was really strange, and it should not have been that way. So my voice is all froggy because I was yelling at this game.
Gotcha.
And
That's
I feel compelled.
wild.
Yeah, I feel compelled to comment on it because it's like a big discussion now nationally for sports for us.
Really?
Yeah, and Texas is right in the middle of it.
Paying
Which
attention
sucks, by the way, because we look like assholes too. You know
Sure,
what I mean?
right. On the national stage, not a great look.
I shouldn't say we look like assholes. We were assholes, and people see it.
Yeah, right.
That's
You're
the
not
thing.
sorry that you did it. You're sorry you got caught.
Kind of, yeah. It's like we know it's a bad emotional moment, but then it led to this thing now that people are overanalyzing, so it's going to live forever. In
Right.
infamy,
Well, I feel
sucks.
like at least 50% of the people seeing this are going to agree with you and be like, all right, it's warranted. But let me ask you a question. I know more professional than college. I indulged college when I was there at Purdue. It was a great time. But is there no review booth? Is there no challenging?
Though there
football?
is, they can review, but there's some penalties that are not reviewable. And it doesn't, I don't think,
Wild.
have the challenge system that they had in the NFL. Penalties are always something, every year there's something new, it feels like.
Okay.
And there's been a lot of changes in the NCAA in the last year with like compensation for players. Specifically for Texas, they're in a whole new conference. They're in the SEC, which is this huge, like very dominant conference. Purdue's Big Ten, right? Mm-hmm. Which is now how many teams? Like 40.
Last I knew, 12, but it could be up. Yeah, I think it's pushing 40 now.
Yeah, so I would like to speak with confidence, but I won't sit here and pretend like I can tell you the rule book for the NCAA.
Well, that is wild.
Yeah.
And it brings to mind as maybe a natural segue, this latest conspiracy, which has always been in the zeitgeist of football, that the refs are in on it in some way, or that they're pushing some sort of scripted narrative. But the big conspiracy I see now is that it's all around gambling, and that people are saying, well, refs are preventing this player from getting this many pass yards, or, it's all very specific, either players or teams, whether it's winning or rushing yards or whatever. And I'm curious if that's going to start popping up with this one, is that, well, they didn't want UT to do too well in their first year because there's an under over there. It's very interesting to see that narrative shift.
It's actually, you've nailed it. So you even said beforehand, I was kind of talking to you a little bit, and you said you'd prefer to talk about this cold.
Yeah.
So your instinct there is 100% correct, but it's the other way.
Oh.
To the point where the coach of Georgia, there's two other penalties which are interestingly controversial. There's a penalty called targeting. Have you ever heard of that penalty?
Yeah.
So it's basically where it's a safety thing. Those are always changing. Those change quicker than anything else, the whole safety thing. And it was two defensive players for Georgia were called for targeting, like almost back-to-back. Not quite back-to-back, but might have been on the same drive. It was that close. And those were two big plays as well, to the point where at the end of the game, the Georgia coach said, no one believed in us, typical coach stuff. And then he said, and the refs tried to rob this game from us. They tried to steal this game from us.
So the team is getting in on it.
He's probably gonna catch a fine for saying that. He probably will. But it was a very emotional, candid moment. So it's a really interesting game. Fucking sloppy game, like 8 turnovers, I think, 7 turnovers. Texas didn't convert a third down until like late in the third quarter. Like we were like 0 for 12 on third downs, and they kept showing that stat up on the screen. I'm like, get that out of here. It's horrible.
When you're up against a very good defense and you are the offensive team, you're in for a bad game.
Yeah,
it's never good to go up against a defensive team.
And you don't want to be in that big crowded stadium when like the visiting team like takes the wind out of your sails, but you could feel it.
Yep.
You can feel it happen.
And I've been in those student sections. Again, I don't condone throwing stuff. I never did. But the energy, oh my God, there's something so addictive about being in that student section when you're watching a game, especially if you're winning. But if you're losing, whatever the opposite of addicting is, I don't like it.
Yeah.
Repulsive.
Well, sure, and the context too of winning or losing changes stuff too.
Yeah.
Like throwing water bottles on the field when you're losing, it's completely trashy. When you win and you storm the field and tear down the goalpost, that's totally awesome. You know what I mean?
But who did that recently? They took it all the way to the river and chucked it in?
I think it was Vanderbilt when they beat Bama. I think it was what it was. Yeah. Because Bama, I think, was number 1 at the time. Mm-hmm. And I think Vandy, they took it. And Texas is playing Vandy next week. So,
hey.
Yeah. What was Purdue's big rival? Is it Northwestern or did you play?
It depends on the lens you're looking at. It's like IU, Notre Dame, Ohio State were like the big ones. Sometimes Illinois, sometimes, Michigan and Michigan State. I mean, it's the entire conference, of course. But the big one would be the Oak and Bucket with IU. And honestly, looking through the Colts lens, our Patriots tended to be the Ohio State team. They're just strong.
Yep. Yeah. It was weird too, because we would go play Ohio State and the rivalries are so strong. We would be there as Texas and they would have on the Jumbotron stuff about like beat Michigan. It's like, Michigan's not here. It's like,
they're like, we've actually moved on past you. We're already thinking about next week,
But Texas does that too. Like, we're playing Georgia, number 5 team in the nation, and people are chanting OU sucks.
That's funny.
So you appreciate the passion when it's applied in the proper ways, I guess is the best way to say that.
Yeah.
And I don't think we applied our passion in the proper way last night. And we got to own that a little bit. We got to own it. So, but back to Red Web. So I'm really curious about this because, when we were talking about like you wanted to come in cold about the football discussion, and thanks for indulging me on that.
Of course.
But like choosing topics is always a big deal for us. And I'd love to hear your process of how you do it for Red Web, because like I gave you an example from today. There was a cool thing I thought, I'm sitting down with Trevor, this would be a great thing to talk about. It's in the Texas judicial system, which has capital punishment, executions. There is a law about junk science where people can go back and appeal court rulings where science has then changed and proven that the methods used to convict them can then be overturned. And that's an interesting thing, that there's this junk science rule. The problem is, I don't want to talk about it today because the guy who's appealing based on one of these rulings, or trying to get an overturned conviction, he's convicted for killing a baby. It's like, so for our show, I just will let that topic go because I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
You know? So like when you tackle Red Web, like how do you guys decide what topic to cover?
That's a very interesting example to set me up because we think very similarly. We talk about anything from true crime to unsolved mysteries, which don't always include death. And then, of course, I have to sprinkle in cryptids, aliens, the paranormal, etc. The stuff I'm desperate to be real, but have to take through the scientific process personally. But our main rules are if it kind of happened this millennia, 2000 and on, or if it's still active, we don't want to step into a case that's still happening. We don't want to be responsible for spreading falsehoods, things that haven't settled. We don't want to get ourselves into something that's still being investigated.
Interesting.
Because there's so many people that want to jump in on everything because it's, we're going to click on that. And you end up sometimes accidentally proliferating a misunderstanding. And word, you know what they say, like a lie spreads around the world faster than the truth can put its shoes on. And yes, it's like a lot, like 90% entertainment, 10% curiosity. I just don't like the idea of using morbidity too much for the sake of like business, right? So
right.
It's really looking back at, old cases a lot of the time, your Jack the Ripper kind of stuff. So it's long settled. A lot of things have changed since then. A lot of investigations have happened. And the things that are more recent are definitely where things have settled. It's still a cold case, like it's still technically open, but it's not being looked at. It's not active.
Right.
So when we're looking for cases to choose, it's kind of pulling back a little bit. It's balancing those three pillars. It's like, all right, let's sprinkle in a little bit of lighthearted ghost here or an alien UFO sighting there. Recently we just did a case that's kind of considered Brazil's Roswell, which is the UFO incident in Varginha in 1996. And that kind of has a backbone of a lot of UFO activity in Brazil. But then the next week we'll look at something like
John Titor.
Yeah. That was one that you actually suggested many years ago.
We had talked about that, yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of the topics...
And that's technically closed, but unresolved.
Right, but also, isn't true crime. It's kind of like there's no new information coming out. There's so many times where we'll put out an episode and something happens. Like very recently, we covered the Golden Owl treasure hunt, something that started, I believe, in the early 90s. It's over in France, and there's a lot of cryptic clues. There's a book with paintings and poems that all coincide to kind of guide somebody to this gold and silver owl statue. We cover the whole thing. And after like 30 years, it hasn't been found. Weeks after we upload that episode, it's finally found.
Oh my God, timing is everything.
That kind of stuff happens all the time.
Yeah.
Or we'll cover something with no kind of timeline. It's not like we covered it because, this happened in August, so let's release it in August. We don't really do that very often, unless it's October. And we'll cover something, and then we'll see like 5 other podcasts also cover the same topic. It's so interesting when you look like that. But yeah, on the whole, it's suggestions like from folks like you, or just like back pocket interest,
or what sparks your curiosity.
Exactly,
that 10% curiosity thing. I'm that way too. It's like I like to look at things, and a lot of times on podcasts, I have to say this a lot, is like people get on these mics and they want to be like the expert know-it-all kind of a thing in things where there is no definitive answer on a lot of things. A lot of things are just subjective, or it's a work in progress, and things are going to change. And so my approach on that is like, we're just curious people and want to investigate. Did you hear though too, while we're talking about updates, I just got to ask you this, the curiosity thing. Did you see there was an HBO documentary that says they found Satoshi?
Oh, interesting. I did not.
Inventor of Bitcoin. It like completely fell under the radar. Like I just read this thing. It's like it didn't get any traction in any like, and that's a huge, he's like a cryptid of the cryptocurrency world,
A crypto cryptid.
And they claim that they have found the person who is Satoshi.
Yeah. The crash course here for anyone who doesn't know, Satoshi Nakamoto, one of our first couple episodes was exploring the inventor of the inventor of Bitcoin.
Yes, the
and
inventor
the
of
blockchain,
Bitcoin. That's
essentially
the best way to say it. The inventor of Bitcoin. Yeah.
Another interesting thing that happened is when we released that episode, and I believe it was either just before or just after. It's been years since we covered it. The wallet that is attributed to Satoshi Nakamoto.
It's conjecture based on how big it is and where it's been and things like that.
And its age and everything.
Yeah.
It finally moved a volume of crypto equivalent to what people estimate that he would have had. Or like only he could have had. And so it's like, it's either him or one of other 5 people or something.
where?
I don't know where it was moved.
Yeah.
But it's like, of course, many years after its invention, we decide we're going to research this and cover this. And that's the time that some new phase happens when it's been cold for so long.
Dude, and it's like, you talk about just being like a recipe for your podcast.
Yeah.
The way cryptocurrency works is it's weird because it's visible but anonymous essentially, but so visible and so trackable that you could theoretically have enough transactions where you can then clue it into what it is and what it's been used for and who technically owned it. But then that just like goes down that like path of just hardcore investigation and connecting the dots and, you know, the red web,
exactly.
The red strings and the lines going up, you know? So yeah. So please tell us, where can people listen to the Red Web podcast?
Anywhere you listen to podcasts, we're there. So Spotify, Apple Play, and then YouTube, if you want to have just put it on the TV, we have a nice little ambiance kind of set up, and then any visuals we talk about, they pop up there.
And then when they get hooked, how can they support the show?
Well, we have a Patreon at patreon.com/redweb, where you can get the show ad-free, lots of other bonus stuff.
All right. Well, Trev, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
And if you want to check out more of Trevor's work, you can listen to the Red Web podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. All right. Well, that does it for us today. We will be back to talk to you tomorrow. We hope you'll be here as well. Bye, everybody.